All right, so today we're diving into David Hume. You know, I gotta admit, when I first heard 18th century Scottish philosopher, I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting into. But let me tell you, this guy, he really makes you think.
Right. And what's amazing is how relevant his ideas still are. I mean, we're talking about knowledge, the self, morality, big stuff, the kind of stuff people are still debating today.
Exactly. And you sent in some really interesting material about all of that, so I'm excited to dig in. To understand why Hume was such a revolutionary thinker, I think it helps to start with, well, where he came from. Edinburgh in the 1700s, that was a really exciting time and place to be.
Oh, absolutely. The Scottish Enlightenment was in full swing, so you've got all this intellectual energy, new ideas clashing with old traditions. It's the perfect environment for someone like Hume to come along and shake things up.
And he was obviously drawn to all of that. I mean, even as a student at the University of Edinburgh, he's already diving into the works of these philosophical giants like John Locke and George Berkeley.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because Hume, he doesn't just read their work and go, oh, okay, that's it. No, he takes those ideas and he pushes them further than anyone thought possible. He comes up with his own unique perspective.
He was kind of a rebel then.
Oh, totally. You can see it in his first big work, A Treatise of Human Nature. It caused such a stir back then, people didn't know what to make of it.
What do they say? Genius is often misunderstood.
Huh, something like that. But the thing is, those radical ideas in the treatise, they went on to become central to Western philosophy. And it's all because Hume had the guts to challenge the very way we think about knowledge.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. Empiricism.
Mhm.
Break that down for me. What did Hume mean by that?
So it all boils down to this. Hume believed that everything we know, every single idea we have, it all comes from our senses. Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, those are the building blocks of all knowledge. And he called those direct sensory experiences impressions.
So not like some philosophers who thought we're born with certain ideas already in our heads.
Nope, according to Hume, we come into the world as blank slates. And it's those impressions, those sensory experiences that fill that blank slate. From those impressions, we then form ideas, which are basically just copies or echoes of those original experiences.
Okay, so give me an example. What's the difference between an impression and an idea?
All right, picture this. You bite into a ripe strawberry right there in the garden. The sweetness, the juiciness, that burst of flavor hitting your tongue, that's your impression. That immediate, vivid sensory experience.
Okay, I can almost taste it.
Right. But then, let's say later on, you're thinking back on that strawberry. Maybe you're craving on that thought, that memory. That's an idea. It's a fainter copy based on that original powerful sensory experience.
It makes so much sense. So everything we know, everything we think we know, it all comes back to our senses. Sounds simple, but I bet that was a pretty revolutionary idea back then, huh?
Oh, absolutely. And this focus on sensory experience, it had huge implications for how Hume understood everything, even something as fundamental as cause and effect. And that's where things get really interesting.
Cause and effect. I mean, that seems like, well, just how the world works, right?
Yeah.
What could Hume possibly have to say about that?
Well, he asks this really simple question, but it has huge implications. He says, can we actually see cause and effect? Or is it more like our minds are connecting the dots, making assumptions?
Okay, need an example here. I'm not sure I follow.
All right, picture this. You're watching a game of pool, right? One ball hits another one, and that second ball, it takes off across the felt. We naturally say, well, that first ball caused the second one to move. But did we actually see that cause happen?
Well, I saw the first ball moving, hit the second ball, and then, yeah, the second ball moved. What else is there?
Right. So we see this sequence of events, one thing after another. But that actual cause, that force that supposedly makes the second ball move, did we see that?
Now that you mention it, I guess not. I just kind of assumed it, because that's what always seems to happen.
And that right there is Hume's point. He's saying our whole idea of cause and effect, it's really based on habit, Our minds connect these events we've seen happen together lots of times, and we start assuming a cause is there, even if we can't point to it directly.
This is his famous problem of induction, right? Heard that term before.
Exactly. Just because, say, the mailman has come to your house every day at 2 p.m., does that logically guarantee he'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m.? No. We assume it because of the pattern we've seen, but there's no rule book of the universe saying it has to be that way.
Oh, man. I'm never going to trust my own brain again.
Sure.
Seriously, though, you're right. We make these leaps of faith based on past experience. But it's not like we've got proof. And this isn't just some thought experiment either. One of those articles you sent, it talked about how this idea from Hume, it really impacted how we understand science,
Absolutely. Before Hume, a lot of scientists, they thought they were uncovering these absolute laws of the universe, totally certain, never changing. But Hume comes along and he's like, hold on, even your best scientific theories, they're still based on what you've observed, on making those inductive leaps. You can't be 100% certain.
So it's more like, this is how we've seen the universe work so far, not this is how it must work always and forever.
Right. Much more humble and honestly probably a more accurate way of looking at what science can tell us about the world. And, this is all connected to a bigger theme in Hume's work, this whole idea of questioning what we think we know, especially when it comes to big concepts like what about the self?
Okay, now you're really making me think. Back then, most philosophers, they believed in a soul, right? Kind of unchanging me at the core of our being.
Yeah, that was the dominant view for a long, long time. And Hume, well, he wasn't so sure.
So how did he see the self? If it's not this permanent, unchanging thing, then what is it? Give me the Hume version.
He called it the bundle theory, which sounds a little funny, but it's actually a really interesting idea. Imagine like a constantly shifting collection of all your perceptions, feelings, memories, kind of like those kaleidoscope toys where the pattern's always changing, never the same thing twice. That's how Hume pictured the self.
Whoa. So not a solid me at the center of it all,
Right,
just
yeah.
this constantly shifting, changing stream of experiences.
You got it. It's no wonder that idea kind of blew people's minds back then. This is like the ultimate challenge to how they thought about identity.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's an idea that still resonates today.
I can only imagine it's so different from how we usually think about ourselves, you know?
Mhm.
But then again, so much of what Hume talked about, it kind of makes you rethink everything. Like we've talked about cause and effect, the self.
Yeah.
But what about morality? That seems like another big one.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where Hume really gets into some fascinating territory. See, a lot of philosophers back then, they were looking for some kind of, rock solid foundation for morality, like reason or maybe some kind of divine law. But Hume, he wasn't so convinced.
Of course not. I mean, this is Hume we're talking about, always questioning everything.
Yeah.
So if he didn't think morality came from some external rule book, where did he think it came from?
Well, get this, he thought it came from our emotions or sentiments. Think about it. Have you ever, seen someone being treated unfairly and just felt this, visceral sense of wrongness? Or maybe you see someone do something incredibly kind and you just feel this surge of warmth.
Yeah, totally. Happens to me all the time.
Right. So those feelings, those are moral sentiments in action, according to Hume. He believed that we all have this, built-in capacity for empathy. We can feel for each other, sympathize with each other, and that's where our sense of right and wrong comes from. Not from some abstract logical deduction, but from these deep-seated feelings.
So it's not like we're calculating what's moral or immoral, we're feeling it.
Exactly, which, when you think about it, reflects how we actually make moral decisions in real life, right? It's not always some big philosophical debate in our heads. A lot of times we just feel what's right or wrong, and then we try to make sense of it later.
Totally. Like I've definitely had moments where I acted on a gut feeling that something was wrong, even if I couldn't immediately explain why it felt wrong. And another one of those articles you sent, it actually quoted Hume on this whole idea. Something like, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic Hume quote. He's basically saying that as much as we like to think we're logical beings, at the end of the day, it's our emotions that are really driving the show. And that goes for our moral choices just as much as anything else.
Wow. This is really making me rethink things. And, it makes me think about Hume's views on religion, too. I mean, that's another area where people have such strong beliefs, and where those beliefs often shape their actions.
You're hitting on something really important there. Religion was definitely a big deal to Hume, and you can see his skepticism at work there, too, especially when it came to some of the traditional arguments for God's existence.
Like the whole argument from design thing, where people were saying, look at how complex and ordered the universe is. Must be a designer behind it all.
Exactly. And Hume, well, he wasn't buying it, or at least not without some serious pushback. He was like, okay, even if we accept that the universe looks designed, how do we know it was designed by, a single, all-powerful, all-knowing God? Couldn't there be some other explanation? He was always questioning those assumptions, looking for the evidence.
So basically, he was applying that same skepticism, that same insistence on grounding our beliefs and experience to the realm of religion, too.
Exactly. He wasn't just trying to tear down people's beliefs, but he was definitely pushing back against this idea that we can just accept things on faith alone. He wanted people to really think critically about what they believed and why they believed it. And honestly, I think that's a really powerful message even today.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of David Hume. This has been such a thought-provoking conversation, and I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us. We covered a lot of ground today, from Hume's life and times to his groundbreaking ideas about knowledge, the self, morality, and even religion. But what I hope you take away from this deep dive is that Hume wasn't just some dusty old philosopher from the past. His ideas, they're still relevant, still challenging us to examine our assumptions and think differently about the world around us. So until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those philosophical wheels turning.